Two bodies are found in a California desert community. The murders are more brutal than any the town has ever seen. Investigators follow clues that lead to one of the country's most respected military institutions. Once the killer is identified, prosecutors battle in court for years, trying to stop him from walking away from a vicious crime, a free man. 29 Palms, California. Located 3 hours east of Los Angeles, the desert city is home to the nation's largest Marine Corps base. When tragedy strikes 29 Palms, investigators struggle to find the person responsible for a crime that shocked veteran prosecutor Gary Bailey.
It was just an outrage that two young girls, that could be anyone's daughters, were just viciously mutilated. It was just a senseless act of violence that needed to be brought to justice.
At 7:40 on the evening of August 2nd, 1991, after completing a 24-hour work detail at 29 Palms Marine Base, Anthony Whitcomb and a friend returned to Whitcomb's apartment. The door was open.
Mary!
The living room was in disarray. His girlfriend, Mary Gonzalez, did not appear to be home. She didn't respond to his calls. When Whitcomb entered the bedroom, he discovered the body of Mary's friend, Amanda Scott, lying on the floor. Her hands were bound, and her body was covered with stab wounds. Then, in the nearby bathroom, Whitcomb found a second victim, his girlfriend, Mary Gonzalez. She was lying in a pool of blood. Whitcomb and his friend left the apartment immediately to call police. When officers arrived, they cordoned off the area. They called in homicide detectives and crime scene technicians. Among those responding was San Bernardino Sheriff's Detective Scott Franks.
What we normally do at the crime scene is we make entry to actually see what we have there. And then we start from the beginning, which would be the front door, and we work our way from the door through the crime scene. That way we don't disturb anything or contaminate any evidence that may be inside.
To document the evidence, crime scene technicians began photographing the area. The horrific nature of the crime pointed toward an especially disturbed killer.
It was obvious that whoever did this acted in an act of rage. It was just a terrible crime scene.
Also inspecting the scene was San Bernardino homicide detective Tom Neely.
There were two female deceased inside. Both of them were nude. They both had multiple stab wounds, and at least one of them had been bound.
The condition of the bodies suggested the victims had been dead at least 8 hours. They discovered a large kitchen knife near the body of Amanda Scott. The knife contained traces of blood. It had been wiped clean of fingerprints, but technicians found a faint shoe impression on the blade. Detectives hoped it might help them identify the killer. Throughout the apartment, crime scene technicians dusted for latent fingerprints. They recovered several from the stereo.
need a picture of this.
Investigators saw signs of a recent party.
Dad here.
They noticed a scorecard with the initials TD and PD written on it. If there had been a party earlier that evening, it would complicate the investigation.
We definitely want to get
They could have dozens of fingerprints to process, and police would have to identify everyone who was inside the apartment. In the bedroom, technicians pointed out a bloody handprint above the body of Amanda Scott.
Okay, and I'll take some.
Judging from the size of the print, detectives believed it was left by an adult male, possibly the killer.
As many as you can get.
The bloody palm print was almost like a stroke of good luck. This is a tremendous piece of evidence. The task we had at hand was making sure that we could satisfactorily recover that print and make an identification from it.
To advise them on handling the evidence, investigators called in Deputy District Attorney Linda Root.
The bloody handprint was very clearly a full handprint of someone with rather large hands. And at that time, they weren't sure whether they should process it by, of course, lifting prints from that wall, or whether they should actually cut the wall. At that time, I made the decision to cut out the wall.
Technicians removed the portion of the bedroom wall that contained the handprint. In the controlled environment of the lab, they could try to determine whose blood it was and compare the print to those of any suspects developed later. Outside the apartment, police discovered another key piece of evidence: a bloody towel. Though it was likely the towel contained the blood of both victims, detectives knew it might also contain DNA evidence from the killer.
I felt that the case was going to depend very greatly on the kind of physical evidence that was being gathered at the scene. And there was an incredible amount of physical evidence in terms of shoe prints, belongings, the weapon itself. So that my feeling was that we were going to be dealing with complicated issues of forensic evidence.
To determine what happened, forensic specialists needed to match each item of evidence to someone who had been at the crime scene.
Yes, sir.
Anthony Whitcomb, Mary Gonzalez's boyfriend, told detectives that he spent the last 24 hours on duty at the Marine Corps base. He said he saw Mary earlier the day before, but did not see her again until he discovered the bodies. His alibi checked out. Investigators took statements from everyone at the scene.
We primarily just interviewed all the people that were in the apartment complex. We interviewed family members that showed up there too. To eliminate any problems, we took them all to the Sheriff's Department in 29 Palms to interview them there.
At the station, they spoke to a neighbor of Gonzalez who claimed he saw both victims early on the morning of the murders.
And this night at the party, what time did you get there?
Around 3 a.m., he stopped by the apartment where Mary and Amanda were staying. When he arrived, they were playing cards with two men he had never met.
Based on what the different neighbors said in the interviews, we knew that there was a black male and he went by the name of Trent. There was also a friend of Mary's who was named Preston. That was really all we had to work with initially.
Detectives now had two first names matching the initials found on the scorecard. Though the neighbor did not know either of the men's last names, he did provide detectives with a key piece of information. The neighbor said he and Preston left the apartment at the same time, shortly after 3 a.m. He noticed a car in front of the building. a white Ford Escort with Georgia plates and a Marine Corps decal displayed in the window.
So you stopped by the party?
The two men the neighbor described might have been from the 29 Palms Marine Base.
For a friend of mine, you know, just see what they were doing, and we walked in, and there was a little thing going on. There were two guys.
Because the investigation might involve Marines, detectives contacted the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. NCIS agent David Hertberg was assigned to act as a liaison between military and local authorities.
When I was given the information by the detectives concerning the white Ford Escort and it had been seen at the apartment in question the night before, we conducted inquiries with vehicle registration databases of all vehicles registered aboard the Marine Corps base.
Base records showed the Ford Escort belonged to a Marine named James Bolio. Bolio was not on base, and a friend said another Marine, a man named Trent Dearborn, often borrowed the car. The name Trent was consistent with the neighbor's story.
Okay. All right.
Detectives needed to talk with Dearborn, the last person believed to be with the victims alive. They learned he had left the base on leave the day after the murders. When Dearborn called the base to give them the number where he was, he learned the authorities needed to talk with him about a double murder. His commanding officer ordered him to return to base. It was a risk. Detectives didn't know if Dearborn would follow instructions or disappear forever. They had to wait and hope he showed. The next morning, Dearborn arrived at the sheriff's office. Detectives questioned him about the morning of the murders.
Do you know what you're here to talk to us about? And
Trenton told us that he had been driving the vehicle that evening. He stopped by Mary's apartment sometime around 2:30 in the morning. He knew Mary from previous occasions. He knew her boyfriend.
had a couple drinks and some stuff.
Dearborn said that he and another Marine had gone to play cards with Mary and Amanda. His friend's name was Preston Driscoll. Dearborn confirmed that Mandy's neighbor stopped by, then left the apartment the same time as Preston Driscoll, around 3 o'clock in the morning.
How you guys doing? With him, Preston left.
Dearborn did not want to drive drunk and decided to stay the night.
When I came back, there was just the three of us.
He said that from that point, he lay down on the floor and fell asleep until sometime between 7:30 and 8 in the morning. And around 8 o'clock in the morning, he left and drove back to the base.
Dearborn told detectives that when he left, Mary was asleep in the living room. He did not see Amanda Scott.
And when he left, he just walked out of the apartment and closed the door. He didn't lock it.
Detectives had found a viable suspect. He was in the apartment around the time authorities believed the victims were killed. And he left town hours later.
We just got done getting this.
Dearborn agreed to give fingerprints and a blood sample.
Those were later submitted to the crime lab and compared with the bloody palm print on the wall, with other prints that were recovered inside the apartment, and the blood was compared to blood found at the scene.
The blood processing could take weeks. Results of the fingerprint analysis might come back in hours. While forensics experts analyzed the evidence, detectives searched Dearborn's barracks.
During the course of the search warrant, we were keying on the clothing that he was wearing the night he was at Mary's apartment. So we did in fact find that clothing and subsequently turned it over to the crime lab, and had it checked for physical evidence for blood, hair, fibers.
Some of the items had what appeared to be dried blood on them. If it was blood, investigators needed to know if it matched the victims. At the autopsy, a medical examiner confirmed that each victim died from multiple stab wounds. Counting the entrance wounds, he also made a compelling discovery. The victims were each stabbed exactly 33 times. Though examiners were unable to determine if rape had occurred, testing revealed the presence of seminal fluid. These samples could be critical in the identification and prosecution of the killer. Lab tests showed the stain on Trent Dearborn's clothes was not blood. After comparing Dearborn's prints to the handprint from the crime scene, examiners reported their findings. There was no match. The handprint wasn't Dearborn's, and he had been fully cooperative. Police released him, believing he was not the killer. It meant a vicious murderer was still out there. In a 29 Palms, California apartment, Amanda Scott and Mary Gonzalez were found brutally stabbed to death. Police had eliminated their only suspect. Hoping to shake free a new lead, detectives visited a friend of Gonzalez who lived nearby at the time of the murders. Police had been told she had information regarding a possible suspect, but was afraid to come forward. She eventually told detectives that the day before the murders, a Marine had stopped by her apartment. She said his name was Val. One of the victims, Amanda Scott, was in the apartment at the time.
What brings you down here?
Something about the man made her uneasy, according to NCIS agent David Hertberg.
It appeared that Amanda was fearful of Val. He's approximately 6'6", about 215 pounds. And he had apparently made moves or hit on Amanda, not only the night in question, but during previous contacts that both Amanda and Val had had with each other.
When Amanda told them she was scared, her friends asked Val to leave the apartment. Detectives now shifted their focus to identifying the man known as Val. Agent Hertberg knew someone who fit the description given by Amanda's friend.
The name of Valentine Underwood immediately came to my knowledge as somebody who I knew from a previous criminal investigation, as well as the fact that he and I played on the same recreational basketball team within the city of 29 Palms.
Hertberg's suspicions increased after reading the autopsy report, which revealed each of the victims had been stabbed exactly 33 times.
I had information from my time when I played on the same basketball team with Underwood that he wore the number 33 on his jersey during the course of all of our basketball games. We verified that information with the 29 Palms Park and Recreation League.
Underwood was a Gulf War veteran with a clean record. Agents could not find him on the Marine base. They learned he was at a basketball tournament at Norton Air Force Base, 175 miles south of 29 Palms. NCIS agents traveled to the base expecting to find Valentine Underwood.
How long ago was that? Oh, maybe 15 minutes.
But he wasn't at the pregame practice. The coach said Underwood had been scheduled to play, but he complained of a hand injury earlier that day. That morning, Underwood had trouble handling the ball due to the injury.
Take a look at this thing.
He told a corpsman he cut it on a razor while cleaning out a garbage can the previous day.
Go ahead and go with him over there. And come on back when you're through. Let me know what's going on. He didn't say. He just showed up.
Agents had doubts about Underwood's explanation.
We obviously had 2 victims with multiple stab wounds. We had a knife that was left on the scene that did not have a hilt on it, so someone could have cut themselves. We're starting to put together that Valentine might be more of a suspect in this investigation.
Investigators found Underwood at the Naval Hospital, where he was recovering from nerve damage to his hand.
Hello, we're from the NCIS.
They told him they were investigating a double murder in 29 Palms and asked if he would answer some questions. He was released from the hospital and agreed to go with them. The detectives escorted Underwood back to the San Bernardino Sheriff's Department. Before being interviewed, Underwood agreed to give fingerprints and a blood sample. Examiners began testing while the suspect was questioned by Detective Tom Neely.
We had a lot of information about him going into the interview. We knew that he knew at least one of the girls. We knew that he'd been to the girl's apartment on previous occasions. Essentially, the strategy we had was to go in and sit down with him and find out if he'd tell us the truth.
They also needed to lock him into a timeline for his actions the night of August 1st and the morning of August 2nd, when the murders occurred.
Never seen her before?
He said that on the 1st, he met a woman in a club and slept at her house that night. At 5:30 the next morning, he returned to base for physical training. Around 8 o'clock, he went back to the house where he slept. At 9:15, he withdrew some cash from an automated teller machine, then visited some friends in Amanda and Mary's apartment complex.
He said he stayed there for a short period of time and then ended up walking back out to the main street where he ran across a female that he used to date, and that female gave him a ride back to the base.
That was at 10 a.m.
So he had a very long, drawn-out explanation of what he did, a lot of details.
Knowing the blood work could take weeks or even months, examiners focused on the latent print evidence. They had to get an answer to detectives quickly. Without more evidence, the suspect would have to be released soon. His alibi had some holes, but Underwood answered all of the detectives' questions.
First of all,
He repeatedly denied being in the victim's apartment on August 2nd, the morning of the murders.
never seen her before.
Police didn't have enough to make an arrest. And without lab results linking Underwood to the crime scene, they could not hold him much longer. As technicians worked to compare the prints, detectives feared they might have to release a man who may have been involved in a brutal double slaying. In August 1991, Mary Gonzalez and Amanda Scott were brutally slain. At the crime scene, police recovered a knife and a bloody handprint. For several hours, Marine Lance Corporal Valentine Underwood was questioned about the day of the crime by Detective Tom Neely.
We essentially locked him into a timeline as to what he did, when he did, where he did, and from that point, we were ready to start verifying his alibi.
Detectives knew they would have to release Underwood soon. They believed he was involved in the crime, but they could not hold him without direct evidence. To find that evidence, forensic specialists worked during the interview. They compared Underwood's prints with the bloody handprint found at the crime scene. Checking comparison points on the fingers and heel of the hand, They determined the prints were a match.
At that point, we knew we had some significant information and a very critical piece of evidence that linked Underwood to this case more strongly than any other person we dealt with up to now.
We just received some news.
When detectives learned of the forensics results, they immediately arrested Valentine Underwood for the stabbing murders of Amanda Scott and Mary Gonzalez.
Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
Recalling the shoe print left on the murder weapon, detectives requested a comparison between the print and Underwood's shoes. Technicians reported the shoes were consistent with the one that left the print. Deputy District Attorney Linda Root now had solid physical evidence against Underwood.
I had every feeling that the evidence available to me at that time would prove beyond any reasonable doubt that Valentine Underwood was the person who killed both of the young women.
However, before a trial could get underway, defense attorneys called for Root's removal from the case.
Because I had been at the scene, the defense attorney had indicated that he would call me as a witness. So basically they brought a motion, what we call a recusal, which means a motion to have the district attorney's office removed from the case or me personally removed from the case.
The move showed the defense was ready to battle for their client.
The defense attorney at the time is certainly an attorney who leaves no stone unturned and leaves no tactic unexplored.
The state did not want to get mired in pretrial motions. The case was reassigned to San Bernardino Deputy District Attorney Gary Bailey.
Mrs. Root felt that the best thing for the case was for her to recuse herself and let some other deputy district attorney try the case. So that's exactly what happened.
2 months later, DNA experts completed their tests.
The results showed that the semen that was found in the victims was Underwood's. That particular evidence showed that the chance of it being someone else's semen was 1 in 3 million. So that was very powerful evidence for us.
Bailey was ready to begin the trial of Valentine Underwood. But in a lengthy pretrial battle, Underwood's defense attorney fought hard to have the case dismissed.
He filed more than 20 motions, almost every motion known to man. He attacked every piece of evidence that we had. He challenged the venue or the location that the trial was going to be in. He moved to suppress the actual physical evidence that we had in the case, the fingerprints, the blood, the semen that was recovered. He attacked and tried to suppress the statements that Underwood gave to the detectives.
The defense's delay tactics kept the case tied up for 6 years. But Bailey fought every motion.
All I could do was just react to whatever he did. And that's typically what happens in a criminal trial. The defense counsels control the case prior to trial. Once the trial starts, that's when we begin taking control of the case.
To get the case before a jury, the prosecutor could not give up. He knew the evidence could survive the delay, but worried about witnesses.
Where the time had the adverse effect was our witnesses, a lot of the witnesses that were Marines were getting out of the service. They were going back home, and we were now going to have to do out-of-state subpoenas. From a logistics standpoint, it was just a nightmare.
Naval Criminal Investigative Service agent David Hertberg used federal resources to keep track of the witnesses.
We also worked throughout the entire 6.5-year process of the court proceedings with the Sheriff's Department and the District Attorney's Office in coordinating the location of possible witnesses for individuals who had gotten out of the Marine Corps and had left the 29 Palms area. We conducted a number of interviews, inquiries, investigative steps throughout the country.
With each passing year, it grew more difficult to maintain contact with witnesses. Prosecutors also feared the witnesses' memories were fading. Without reliable witness testimony, they might not be able to present a successful case, and Valentine Underwood would be released. In August 1991, the murders of Amanda Scott and Mary Gonzalez shocked the desert community of 29 Palms, California. Investigators believe Marine Lance Corporal Valentine Underwood was the killer. But for years, Underwood's defense team worked to get the case dismissed through pretrial motions. Deputy District Attorney Gary Bailey fought back, arguing against each of the defense's 28 motions to dismiss.
This was the first case that I had ever had that had so many motions attached to it. Of course, my obligation is to respond to each and every one of them, whether they're meritorious or not. We knew we were going to win the majority of the motions because we felt they were just delaying in nature. But nevertheless, we still had to have a hearing, we still had to call witnesses, we still had to arrange for those witnesses to be present, and that took a tremendous amount of time.
The prosecutor's endurance paid off. After more than 6 years, the defense exhausted their motions, and a judge ordered the trial to begin on October 14, 1997. In his opening, the prosecutor explained what he believed the evidence would prove happened on the morning of the murders.
It's my belief that sometime after 9:15, Underwood walked into that apartment, the door being left open.
The prosecutor believed Underwood turned up the stereo, leaving his prints there. He found Amanda Scott asleep. When she ran, he followed and subdued her.
I believe that he bound Amanda Scott and silenced her. That was evidenced by her hands were bound behind her with a telephone cord, and there was a garment around her neck. I then believe that Mr. Underwood confronted Mary Gonzalez in the bathroom. There was blood all over the bathroom area. I believe that he then raped and killed Mary Gonzalez.
On the morning of August
and then I believe he walked over to Amanda Scott again. I believe he then raped Amanda Scott, and after he was finished, I believe he stabbed her 33 times. I think that's the best explanation for the evidence, the forensic evidence that we found in the case.
You also hear evidence that
the defense chose to withhold its opening statement until the state rested. Free to continue, the prosecutor needed to explain the timeline of events the day of the crime, stating that the murders took place between 9:15 and 10:45 on the morning of August 2nd.
I knew timelines were going to be important in the case. So what we did is we called witnesses that would establish the timelines of the victims themselves.
Yes, I did.
The prosecution called Trent Dearborn, one of the last people known to have seen the victims alive.
Can you tell us what you did on the night of August the 1st, 1991?
I borrowed a friend's car and went out to 29 Palms.
The prosecution wanted the jury to see Dearborn as an honest, believable witness,
I can see anybody that I knew.
knowing that the defense would later attempt to blame him for the murders.
Did you kill Amanda Scott or Mary Gonzalez?
No, sir, I didn't.
During cross-examination, Dearborn admitted to being alone with the victims at the apartment that morning.
Did you check into the base?
It was roughly 8 o'clock in the morning.
And you did sign in?
No, sir.
The defense pointed out his alibi could not be
You can
corroborated,
go if you like.
suggesting he had something to do with the
It's been
murders.
a while since I was in the service, but everything's changed.
Yes, sir, it has.
Thank you.
Next, the prosecution wanted the jury to hear about the strange similarity in the wounds of each victim. They called the medical examiner to testify.
Did you come to a conclusion as to the number of stab wounds that you observed to the body of Amanda Scott?
Yes, it came to a total of 33.
He said Mary Gonzalez suffered exactly the same number of wounds. The medical examiner stated that such consistency in the number of wounds in two victims is highly unusual.
The particular kind of knife that
The prosecution then focused on the murder
found
weapon.
to be consistent with that kind of wound?
Yes, this knife is certainly consistent.
He testified that the butcher knife found in between the two victims was exactly the type of instrument that caused those particular wounds.
The medical examiner testified that the stab wounds showed signs of extreme force.
Made with this type of knife.
Using a prop knife, he demonstrated how such forceful strikes would have penetrated through the victims' bodies.
It was a left-handed.
The significance of that was that we believe the killer injured himself with the murder weapon because when the knife went through Mary Gonzalez, it stuck in the floor, and we believe the hilt of the knife went into Mr. Underwood's hand.
Losing the grip and sliding down.
The prosecution then showed jurors a photograph of Valentine Underwood's injured hand.
We've shown when we found him.
They, of course, would try to show that possibly it could have been caused by some other instrument other than that particular butcher knife. He allowed for that possibility, but he testified that if it wasn't that knife, it was one very, very similar to it.
The defense and the state then battled over the significance of the 33 stab wounds.
Now, regarding the hand...
They also tried to impeach the actual number of stab wounds that he found, indicating that possibly one could be 34 and one could be 33. He was pretty adamant that each of the girls were stabbed 33 times.
Mr. Herbert.
To explain the link between the number 33 and the defendant, the prosecution called NCIS agent David Hertberg, who had played basketball with Underwood on a recreation league before the killings.
Agent with NCIS.
He had wore the number 33 on his jersey for all of our basketball games between late April and I believe into early June. It was considered the possibility that the number 33 was significant in some manner to Valentine Underwood, which might have led as a premeditated act when he committed the murder and inflicted 33 stab wounds to both victims.
The prosecution then called Sarah Brame to the stand. As part of his alibi, Underwood claimed he was with Brame hours before the murders.
So you got.
I do.
The prosecutor asked about that night.
She testified that after she met Mr. Underwood in a bar, they danced, they had drinks together.
Later on, I asked him if he wanted to come back to my apartment for some more drinks.
She took him to her apartment out in the 29 Palms area.
Ooh, that was close.
That was really
no cigar. Drink
Oh,
up.
I don't get, all right.
Her girlfriend and her girlfriend's boyfriend had retired for the evening and gone to bed. She testified that she was playing quarters with Mr. Underwood in the kitchen.
Yeah, drink that thing.
I drank it.
She then testified that he made some advances towards her.
When she refused Underwood's advances, he became enraged, grabbing her and holding a knife to her neck.
Me like that?
Her girlfriend heard her scream, came out to see what was wrong, and Mr. Underwood indicated that he was just playing.
Since the incident occurred hours before the murders, the prosecutor asked about Underwood's hands, which he claimed he injured the day before.
Did you ever see him bleeding from his hands, or did you see bandages while he was playing quarters with you?
No, I did not.
Then, the defense attorney questioned Brame about the time she spent with Underwood after he pulled the knife.
And other than that, all your contact with him would you say he has been a gentleman in your mind?
Yes, I would have said, I'd say that he was a perfect gentleman up until that point.
In fact, you felt so comfortable with him that you left the house with him. Isn't that right?
Yes, I did.
And in fact, you felt so comfortable after the incident that you stayed around and talked to him for an hour or so and drank more beer.
Yes, we did. I can't remember if we dozed off and drank a little more. I don't really remember.
Court, thank you for your testimony. You may step down.
The prosecution then called experts to testify about DNA evidence,
That is the towel.
introducing the blood found on a towel at the crime scene.
What results did you come up with?
The DNA expert testified that blood samples extracted from the towel matched the blood sample from Valentine Underwood. The jury also heard the DNA expert testify about examinations of the seminal fluid retrieved from the victims.
It was obvious that this was a sexual assault case. In proving sexual assault cases, we used blood serology testing. And really all that does is tell you whether or not a person is included or excluded as a possible donor.
The expert told the jury that Underwood could not be excluded, and the chance of the fluid coming from anyone else was 1 in 3 million.
You can't tell how the sperm was deposited.
Underwood's attorney asked if DNA tests could prove the victims had been raped.
That means that you can't tell whether it was voluntary sex, rape, or either.
That's correct.
Sir, for your testimony.
Since the defense hadn't denied the DNA was Underwood's, the state believed they would try to explain its presence during their case. After 4 weeks of the state's presentation, the defense was ready to give their opening statement, offering the jury an entirely different picture of the events of the morning in question.
My client will be asked to testify regarding his statement to the officers.
The defense contended that Valentine Underwood was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time.
He will then go through his testimony.
They claimed that he discovered the victims in the apartment, and after trying to help them, he ran because he was afraid.
His fear. He did not kill those girls.
You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
To support their claims, the defense called the Gulf War veteran to the stand. They began by explaining his hand injury.
Yes, I was on cleaning duty. I was cleaning out a trash can, I had my hand in there. So as I was coming out, I felt something hit my hand. It didn't really hurt at first, but as I pulled it out and I looked, I had a razor edged and angled out of my hand.
Underwood's attorney reintroduced the photo of the defendant's hand, explaining the injury was consistent with the razor wound.
Doing his duty, working on the base.
The defense then asked Underwood about his relationship with Amanda Scott and Mary Gonzalez.
Have you ever dated Mary?
We spent time together, yeah. We dated, we spent a lot of time together.
In a surprising change to his story, Underwood now claimed that he knew both of the girls, testifying that he was even involved in an intimate relationship with Mary Gonzalez. Underwood's attorney then had to counter the powerful DNA evidence that linked his client to the crime scene and the victims. The attorney asked about the night before the murders.
Did you talk to Mary?
Yes, I had went by there actually. She told me to come in. So I came in, we started talking, started playing and joking like we normally do.
His story changed dramatically, according to Prosecutor Gary Bailey.
Mr. Underwood then testified that it was earlier in the evening when he was over at the victim's apartment. He had consensual sexual intercourse with both of the victims.
And the next thing I remember, Amanda came in.
Mm-hmm. And after Amanda came in, what happened?
She sat down, we struck up a little conversation. She started telling me about how she remembered me from a party that I had attended.
Did you have sex with her?
Yes, sir. Yes, I did.
His testimony was a blow to the state's DNA evidence.
The jury knew he had sexual relations with the victim. So from that perspective, the DNA evidence wasn't that compelling.
Underwood then testified that he returned to the victim's apartment the following morning.
Mary! Amanda! Mary! Hello? Hello, Mary? Hello?
He testified that he walked in, found the girls in their condition, both being naked, that he was horrified, that he walked over to Amanda, felt her pulse and must have got blood on his hand. He stood up. That's probably when he left his hand on the wall. He decided that he was going to call law enforcement, decided against that because there was 2 young ladies that had just been murdered. He became afraid. He wiped off his hands on something. He left the apartment and went back to the base.
Underwood's version of events accounted for all the evidence the state had presented. If the prosecution could not refute his story, an accused killer would likely go free. In 1997, Valentine Underwood stood trial for the murders of Mary Gonzalez and Amanda Scott. His testimony had severely damaged the state's case. Next, the prosecutor would try to use Underwood's own words against him. Reading from Underwood's original statement taken by detectives, Prosecutor Gary Bailey asked the defendant about each fact, returning to the timeline of events already established.
We were going to counter the defense's theory of the case by showing that Mr. Underwood could not be believed.
The state reviewed Underwood's testimony regarding his injured hand, pointing out he had given police several different versions of how he cut it.
The first one was that he was cleaning the latrine and cut it on a trash can. His second version was that he had actually received the cut while involved in a traffic accident. And his third version was that he received the cut on his hand while slamming a basketball on the goal. Of course, these 3 separate versions were inconsistent, and they just bolstered the prosecution's case that everything that came out of this man's mouth was a lie. Again, remembering his interview with homicide detectives, where he told 3.5 hours of lies, of not knowing these girls, not being there. He was now going to have to take the stand, deny all of that. So my tactic was I was going to go over each one of these lies and find out just how many times he lied to the officers. And by his own admissions, he lied more than 100 times.
In fact,
at the conclusion of Underwood's testimony, the defense rested. The case went to the jury.
Will the defendant please rise?
After deliberating 2 full days, they returned. The fate of the defendant lay in which story the jury believed.
We, the jury,
Underwood's or the state's.
Valentine Underwood, guilty.
The jury's verdict came back. They found Mr. Underwood guilty of 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder.
Nearly 7 years after the murders of Mary Gonzalez and Amanda Scott, Underwood was sentenced to life in prison.
I think, first of all, it was important to give the victims' families some closure, to let them know that the person that did that to their little girls had finally been brought to justice. And secondly, to prevent this evil man from ever doing something like this again.
Valentine Underwood will never be eligible for parole.